I would like to share something about my mom that I was thinking about. Um, I call it buried my head in the sand. And what um, what it's about literally is about just that. How long I went on ignoring what was going on with my mom's condition for all of these years. Um, I want to think that the start of this whole thing was when I noticed um, what was happening was that because we were taking care of my dad who had cancer at the time, we would not pay as much attention to each other, including my mom. Everybody was sort of like surviving on their own and spending all the time and effort in taking care of my dad. And then once my dad passed away, I noticed that my mom was acting out, and some of the things that she would do is some of the things she did was I would take her shopping. She would like to go to the grocery store just about every day, and I remember she would always purchase basically the same things. Um, it would be flour and beans and rice and milk, coffee, things like that. Things that she had always bought, vegetables and so forth. And I would bring her home, and I lived right above her. And then later on, I would come downstairs to check and see how everything was going. And I would ask my sister, I said, "Where's Mom? I don't see her anywhere." And then she would say, "Oh, Mom went to the store." And I'm like, "She went to the store? Well, maybe she must have forgot something." And then my mom would be coming home purchasing this exact same thing she had bought earlier. Exactly the same things. And I would say, "Mom, where did you go and why are you coming back with the same things?" And she said, "Oh, I needed these things." And I said, "Mom, we just went to the store. You just bought these things." And then I would just say, "Well, maybe she forgot." I didn't know what to think, and I just buried my head in the sand on that. And then as time went on, I noticed that she would get more and more confused about people. She would confuse who they were in her life and so forth. And she would be confusing things that were going on the TV. She would think that it was real. She would be watching her Spanish soap operas, and she would say, "Oh, this is a mean lady," or "This is a nice lady," or "She's my friend," and so forth. And I was thinking she was just entertaining herself. Again, I would just bury my head in the sand about that too, and thinking, well, maybe it's just she enjoys telling me the stories in her own way, and let it go. I'm making excuses for her. And then other things started happening that were um, really, really, really bad. It was getting worse. It wasn't something I could bury my head in the sand about. One day, both my wife Vivian and I had to were working, and we had no one to pick up our son who was in kindergarten at the time. And I remember it was a real cold time of the year, and I said, "Mom, do you think you'll be able to pick up Eli from kindergarten? It's quite cold out there, and we're just not going to get back in time to pick him up." And I said, "Can you bundle up enough to go and pick him up? And you know where the school is. It's only a couple of blocks away, 2, 3 blocks away." "Of course I will," she said. She loved all the grandkids. So I was at work that day, and I just had a feeling. And I'm like, there's something that's not sitting right with me. So I went out, and it was, like I said, it was dead of winter. It was really cold out there, and I knew he was going to be getting out half day. So I just said, I'm just going to drive by the school and see if I can just, from there go on to the house and see what's going on. And as I come up there, it's a little after 11. My son was due to get out for noon at 12 o'clock. And I noticed my mom in the schoolyard, and there was a solitary tree in this little playground area. And my mother was literally hugging this tree, trying to stay out of the elements. She was literally freezing to death. And I jumped out of the car and I said, Mom, what are you doing? What are you doing here at this time? And she said, I came to pick up Eli. I said, Mom, it's just a little after 11. He doesn't get out until noon. How long have you been here? Well, she couldn't tell me that. So I brought her home, and, I realized at that time, I gotta get my head out of the sand. I mean, this is bad. This is really, really bad. So I can't trust her to pick up our son any longer. And we have to make other arrangements. And I warmed her up and everything, got her something to drink, and then I went and got my son and everything, and I had to explain at the job what was happening. And then what happened was, now she's in the house, and I come home from work, and my mom says, you look so tired, son. Can you want some coffee? And I said, sure, that would be nice. And all of a sudden, I saw smoke billowing out of the kitchen. And I ran in there, and she had taken a plastic container, filled it with water and dish soap, put coffee in it, and set it on fire on the stove. I said, Mom, what are you doing? I'm making you your coffee, son. I said, you know what? I decided I don't want any coffee. I'm okay the way I am. And I put the fire out. I didn't yell. I didn't want to scare her. And I said, come on, let's just sit down and we'll talk for a while. And at that point, I realized I have to just not allow her. I got to get her out of the kitchen. But of course, that was her life. One of her loves in her life was cooking and taking care of us. And the food preparation was huge in her life ever since she was a little girl. So what I did was I actually bought some covers that went over the switches on the stove, on and off switches, and I just put them on there. They were like kid-proof type of things, so children couldn't come up and put them on for obvious reasons. And my mom could no longer put it on. She couldn't turn the flames on any longer, and that really infuriated her. And I would tell her, well, I got to get that fixed for you. Don't worry, I'll get it fixed for you. But again, at that point, I realized I had to get my head out of the sand about that too. So eventually I did. In every sense of the word, I had to do that. I could not trust her for anything simple any longer. And I would have to tell her exactly a quick story to make her understand, so she wouldn't feel bad about why she couldn't any longer go out. And she couldn't do the things she used to love to do. After my mom had passed away, my sister, who is hearing impaired, she had a dear friend of hers who developed Alzheimer's. And she was a very nice woman. And she had like 7 children, and obviously her husband, and they were all hearing impaired, all of them. And eventually they grew up and they moved away and they had their own families. But one of her sons had gotten divorced, and he had stayed back to take care of his mother and father. His father wound up in a nursing home, and his mother, who was very sweet, she started acting out. And my sister said she noticed it because they would speak on the TV. They had a device that would allow them to communicate visually. Obviously, they couldn't speak. And she would notice, and through sign language, she would pick up the nonsense that this poor woman was talking about, which the same type of things my mom would be talking about. The confusion, the hallucinations, everything that went with it. So it was starting to get dangerous for her, I think, because of the medicines and everything. And one thing that she did have that my mother didn't have was she was diabetic, which scares you even more. So what happened was, I asked my sister, can you please tell her son to please come and see me? Her son I knew quite well. I knew her family. So he came over, and he's a nice man. And I said to him, listen, first of all, I want to commend you for the way you take care of your mother. You're doing a remarkable job, I said. And I know you're working hard. You're working second shift, and you're working long hours and so forth. I said, And I know your dad's in a nursing home, so it's got to be hard for you, and there's really no one else around. But I've heard that your mom is having difficulty with certain things. And he's like, my mother's fine. And we're signing. This is all in sign language. And I'm telling him, well, look, I don't want to get personal, but I heard that literally, your mom doesn't bathe anymore. And I know that a lot of people with Alzheimer's, they become afraid of water, or they get forgetful to the point where they don't bathe. They don't change their clothes. Obviously, they don't brush their teeth. They just don't do anything. All they do is just go through the motions of a day. And there's stories about this that I had experience with my own mom. So everything that I would bring up to him in a very careful way, he would deny. And he would just look at me like right eye to eye, and he'd say, my mother's fine, my mother's fine. And then it hit me, my goodness, you're just like I was. Your head is completely buried in the sand. And even with everything that's happening, you haven't even started to take your head out yet. Eventually something's going to happen. And even later on, when his mother would take off and walk the streets, and everybody was frantically looking for her, and the police would eventually find her and bring her home, it still did not deter this man to get any help until it was way too late. And I've always said, you have to go in for treatment, and you need to put yourself in a position to help them. And at the time, there were meds. There are meds now, and there were meds then too. I've spoken to friends of mine whose parents have had it, and at the time they got it, there was no medication for it. So that's even sadder, and that's why I think the meds helped my mom to be home with me and in my life for all the years she was, which is 16 years. And of course the care and love and understanding we gave her. It's a struggle, but these are things you have to do. And the first thing is really realizing that you need to get your head out of the sand, because if you got your head buried in the sand, obviously you can't hear or see anything. You're just not understanding things, and you can't convince yourself that nothing's happening to your loved one. I just wanted to share this with you and see what your thoughts are.